right, we are live. Hi everybody, this is GeekGirlCon, and we are doing a really awesome stream tonight, which is the Creating Worlds stream, and we're going to be talking to various awesome experts on this particular subject in different fields, who all create worlds in various different ways. I'm really excited to hear what everybody's different perspectives are on this topic, and just kind of see what the intersections are and the differences. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself first, and then I'll kind of name each of you to kind of introduce yourself, and we'll do our names, our pronouns, and you can tell what you do, and what, you know, if there's some other little tidbit you want to throw in, feel free. But yeah, we'll just kind of go around. So first of all, I'm Christina. I am with the Twitch team at GeekGirlCon, and my pronouns are they or she. I will be moderating tonight. How about you, Anna? Oops, muted.
Muted.
Oops, I forgot I have to push the button.
It's classic. We do it all the time on our stream.
I am Anna Kringle. I'm an author in Storysmith. I write steampunk stories and a few other ones. And my pronouns are she, her.
Awesome. Thank you. Catherine.
I'm Catherine Lundoff. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a writer. I'm best known for a series of menopausal werewolf novels. So I'll talk a little bit about that tonight. I also write gaming tie-ins. I write Sherlock Holmes stories and a bunch of other things. And I run Queen of Swords Press, which is a small science fiction, fantasy, and horror publishing house based in Minneapolis. And I get to publish other people's worlds and their vision of the fantastic and where that's going.
Awesome. How about you, Celeste?
Hey everybody, my name is Celeste Conowitch. I am a senior game designer in the tabletop role-playing space, so I work for Kobold Press, so primarily on things like Dungeons & Dragons. It's probably about 90% of what I'm working on right now, but I have designed for other games as well. And in addition to that, I am the game master of Venture Maidens, which is an actual play 5th edition stream and podcast that I have been running for about 6 years now. So lot of storytelling under my belt, and I'm thrilled to be here and chat with all of these wonderful different type of creatives and see what we have in common and what we don't. I can't wait.
Yay. And Hannah.
Hi, so I'm Hannah. I commonly go by H2. Not H2, just like H as well. Anyway. So I am a graphic novelist, and currently I sort of work in the publishing space as a graphic novel letterer. I work with middle grade publishers like Scholastic and Little Bee Books. I'm currently working on a couple of graphic novels. One's going to be a web comic that I just self-publish, and it has a world that I have to build for it, and then the other is going to be pitched to different publishers, and it has a little bit of world building, but it's kind of a different audience. So I'll probably be talking more about the webcomic.
Awesome. Yay. Well, I'm really, really happy you were all able to join us, and really excited to kind of just chat and hear your perspectives. I just got the blast from the people doing the reactions. Those are brisk. I don't know if you can hear them. Probably. I'm not sure, because I might only get them because I'm in Streamlabs right now. So I had a list of questions for all of you to think about. We were going to kind of just start with, I guess we covered introductions there, so we kind of got that. So we might, unless you can think of another thing that I may have forgotten, but then we could probably jump into the rest of the list, and just kind of get started talking about creating worlds. Yeah, so the first one is, what is your creative process when you're creating and or adding details to a world in your work? And you can, whoever feels like they're ready to answer can jump in with that first, and I'm going to be working behind the scenes on another thing at the same time, so please feel free to go ahead shoot for it.
Oh gosh, I mean, this is a question. So I'm happy to start, I guess. So yeah, so world building, I guess for folks who may not know in the chat specifically what world building is, it's what kind of what it sounds like. So when you have a narrative work, it's building the framework of everything, right? The details, where you are, what the rules of whatever environment you're in, whatever society you happen to be in, and all the background stuff, I guess, that kind of informs conflict in your world, conflict or resolution or whatever it is. So I guess I always like to start, and coming from a game design perspective, I'm curious if this is similar to a narrative perspective or not, but I always like to think about what is needed. Like, what is the game I'm working on? What is the theme we're trying to go for? And why is this game being made? Right. And that, I think, informs a lot of what goes into the world. Because if we want to make a game dealing with environmental issues, right? Obviously, the world is going to need some environmental problems for our heroes to solve, some villains addressing that situation. So I guess I always start with need and then try and work from there to build that support before I can build anything else.
Yeah, I think that one of the ways in which non-game fiction, is different. It's that you, in many respects, you have less structure around it. So there isn't a necessarily shared common language about what the world is going to consist of. So you have to drill down to, okay, so they're going to this tavern. What are they spending there? What language are they speaking? Does everybody speak a different language? Where does that come from? So I think that, one of the cool things about writing within, a gaming space is you need to set up that structure first. But when you're working in, for example, a novel, you may or may not have that. Obviously it's different if you're doing a series, but when you're starting it, completely from scratch, there's so much opportunity to kind of wing it. It's a lot of fun that way.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. It looks like somebody said that we're disconnected.
Oh dear.
And yeah, now it looks like our video structure changed. I'm not sure what happened with that. That might have put it back. Yeah, it was the chat. But yeah, I'm not sure what caused the disconnect there. I'm so sorry for the interruption. It looks like everyone's reporting that we're back on. So
yeah, we look like we're back on. Yeah, but it looks like all the overlay, the boxes got.
Yeah, I think I'm hoping, having just popped back out the chat. I think it was when I opened the chat.
It looks good now.
Yeah, I think I opened the chat to see the message, and then I was like, uh-oh, and it kind of moved everything aside. So fortunately, we're back. Yeah, I'm not sure what happened with the disconnection. Hopefully, we'll stay stable.
Yeah. So I think, Catherine, we probably missed a bit of your answer. Could you re?
Yeah, that would be
super
great.
interesting about language.
Okay. Okay. So recapping, I think that one of the things that I was talking about during our glitch was about some of the differences in terms of world building between doing gaming writing and doing fiction writing. In that, for gaming writing, you've often got, you're often establishing rules and structure and a certain kind of, expectation with your readers. Whereas when you're doing fiction, often a reader goes into it without some of that information. So you have to give them detailed information to start with, because you've got all of these things that go into creating, for example, a fantasy world, and that's everything from the economy to the social structures to the language to what makes it fantastical. And all that detail has to get worked into the story in a different way. So I think it's an interesting opportunity to compare those two kinds of writing, to be on this panel and talk through some of that stuff.
Yeah, like what you said, you know, when I first started like writing, my first attempts at doing like a long form story in like kind of a made up setting, when I was by myself, I was like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna write stuff that develops the setting. And then when I started presenting it to other readers and getting to know other people who are willing to like look at each other's works in progress, I quickly realized that if there isn't a story, like no one's gonna stick around for the world building. So that was kind of a rough lesson. So what I wound up like focusing on was like onboarding, you know, what information do people need to be supplied with for this immediate scene? Because I just couldn't give them information that would happen later in the story. Like it has to be really immediate. They have to know why it's there, or else they're not going to remember it, or they're just going to be confused or bored. So that was kind of one of the rough lessons that I got. And I wouldn't say that I'm not sure how good it is still. I keep practicing. Maybe eventually I'll get to where I want to be. But yeah, that's just sort of like you kind of have to have a character with a motivation and stuff that gets in their way between them and their goals, and everything else, you know. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. My cat is sitting on my computer. I'll be right back.
It's good talking about challenges that our heroes have to overcome, and there we are.
World building.
World building, we're doing it. We're doing it live, you guys. Wow.
That actually segues into my thoughts on world building. What Hannah and Catherine both said make a lot of sense, because I think the biggest struggle for me is that pacing of when to give information and how much information to give. I remember one specific time I literally spent 2 days talking to my cousin who was a mechanic to figure out how to make my flying ships fly. And then I ended up not putting it in any of the book at all. So that's definitely a thing. My process, I kind of look at as the scientific method. I start with a postulation of what if I had this kind of a human being or non-human being? They have this kind of personality. What would happen if I put them in this situation? What would a person like that do? If I throw them up against another person who acts this way, how would that, what would happen? How would they interact? How would they mesh? How would they end up butting heads? So I don't know, I can identify with your game building in that regard, because that is how my brain works. Because it's all about, like Hannah said, it is all about the people and their struggles and their triumphs and their not triumphs. And that is the point, and the fantastical worlds that we build around them are the icing on the cake. They're just kind of what gives it more interest. But yeah, I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting. Like we're all kind of dancing around. We'll probably get to this in a bit, but like the way you have to parcel out world building, I think is something that we all have struggled with. So that's interesting.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. Like there's a lot of commonalities, but a lot of differences too. So that's like, yeah, I think everybody did a great job with that one. That's like really informative. So yeah, then the next one that we had on there was, do you have any favorite sources of creative inspiration that help you come up with ideas? So maybe this also ties into that last question, but or maybe it doesn't. I don't know. So I'd be interested to hear.
When I'm really in the zone, I like to listen to Scandinavian murder ballads. And the handy thing is that since they're not in languages that I understand, I can't get distracted by the lyrics.
But is the passion there? You can hear the
bloodshed, the hurdy-gurdies, all of that stuff.
I'm gonna have to get some band recommendations from you after this, Catherine. Oh my goodness.
That is awesome. That's really cool.
Yeah, I guess for me, I mean, it's... I read this somewhere, or I think maybe it was in a Stephen King book somewhere, or his book on writing or whatever. It was like, you can't write if you don't have time to read, which is Absolutely true. I feel like in a lot of ways you really do have to just read, absorb, look at everything around you, play other games. For me, it is so important that I play different tabletop role-playing games every time I get a chance. I love playing board games. I love video games. Any opportunity to get into the mind of someone else and enjoy it on a surface level like you would with any other kind of leisure activity, but then also spend some time percolating, like, how did this work? You have to look at other machines, right, and play with them to figure out what they do and how they work. And that can be so exciting when I find a video game that just totally takes over my life and I love it and I'm
Yeah.
in it. I can walk away from that experience later, 48 hours later with Dorito dust on my face, and look back and go, oh my God, what was it? Like, what was it that got me in there? So just exploring work from other creators, and even if I don't like something, if I had a strong emotional reaction to it, that is usually a very good indication that I should look at that more closely, because there's probably something really helpful to learn there.
So for me, I've actually found it really helpful to look outside of fiction and pop culture, because if you're building something and you want to differentiate it, it might be better to kind of, maybe you really enjoy reading fantasy novels, but it might be worth it, like if you're creating something and you want to like make it new, it's often worth it to check out like academic stuff on topics. So I kind of delved into medieval studies. I sort of stuck a pin in 12th century because I had this like demon motif in my world building, and I looked up, when did people start talking about demons? Like, when was this a thing? And the first mention I found was like the University of Paris got closed by the king because all the students were practicing too much demonology. And I was like, okay, well, I got to know more about that. And I sort of discovered this sort of like pocket universe almost that was like ready-made, and all I had to do was like research it, and that would give me ideas for more conflicts. So what's really fun is just I've stumbled across this like kind of late 12th century Paris setting where all the clerks are drunk and stabbing each other. Clerks is sort of like it's a shortening of cleric. So that's a much different definition for a cleric than what you'd get from pop culture. And there was that thing where it's like, as long as you're wielding a mace, you're not technically drawing blood, so you can just go whack people on the head all you want in battle as like a bishop or whatever.
Oh my.
And, all this stuff in gaming and pop culture of medieval stuff came from somewhere. So it's kind of fun to run across those things and know where they came from and then kind of leverage it. And just be like, oh, you think this is going to be about that kind of cleric? No. These clerics do necromancy. They have, magic spells where they line a silver bowl with, opium, and they look at visions in their fingernails, like just all kinds of weird stuff. Yeah, so it's worth it. Like, even really dry books can have ridiculous stuff like that in them.
It would be really fun to talk to you about history sometime, H.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, anytime I'm gonna try not to overtake it, I could totally just keep talking, but I need to respect everyone's presence here as people who've actually published and produced things.
Oh, I totally get that. Just as a quick riff off of what you just said. So a big part of my job obviously is making monsters in the world. And people are often like, where do you get ideas for monsters? And I'm like, yo, have you ever looked at everything under the ocean just for a second? Like, looking at nature and science is incredible fodder for making nightmare monsters constantly. So yeah, drawing from real world, there is so much going on.
What's your
Sure.
what's your favorite weird animal that you've found?
Oh gosh. Well, I don't know if I have a weird animal, but it just came to me learning about how some mollusks have feet and trying like that and putting that on monsters like tentacle feet
Oh,
and how that works.
Ugh.
They can have a distendable foot. Because we're like, how do I do movement speed? How do I make this underwater? Like this kind of, oh boy, it's just every time. Or plants in particular too, plants and insects that can mind control other creatures. And there's some wild stuff, y'all. You fall down a lot of weird rabbit holes when you're doing world building research. I think it's safe to say that we've probably all been down one or two.
That's a fact. Yeah.
Could I make a quick creature recommendation to you that you'll probably love?
Absolutely.
Look into lobopods.
All right, I'm looking.
They're great. If you like mollusks, you will like lobopods.
I didn't say I like them, but I fear and respect them. How about that?
I feel like we're seeing like a future inspiration for one of your future works.
There's a collaboration happening here, and it's weird, and I like it.
Yeah. Did everybody get a chance to mention their inspirations? Did we get everybody?
Did Anna get to talk?
Did Anna? Okay.
Oh, I don't know. I got distracted by lobopods and history and things. This was awesome. My most recent inspiration has been coming from my nieces and nephews. I GM a game for them. I was telling the other panelists earlier, and they come up with the most ridiculous things to do. And it's just kind of fun to kind of get inspiration from the way someone else's brain works. So it's a lot like this conversation where we're talking about our own things, but we're also pulling from each other, and just new sparks are flying in my brain. So it's great.
I can't wait for you to write about a steampunk lobopod and or mollusk.
I might have to. This is going to be a thing. I do like quirky animals in my books, so it's this might have to happen.
This thing is terrifying. You should.
I'm gonna have to Google now.
Look at it.
Oh wow, I'm gonna be also following up on this later.
Yeah, I hope we answered your question. I don't. It seems like we're all just doing a circle of pain. Maybe I don't know, but it's something's happening.
No, it's good. Yeah, and yeah, hopefully you're giving people in the audience some ideas too while you're at it. The next question was, are there any hard rules you follow when creating or developing a world or environment, or any kind of do's and don'ts list? And I guess those are kind of sort of the same question, sort of different, so whichever one appeals.
I think that getting people's reactions to things you want to include the story is really important. Unless you are just sort of developing your own daydreamy world, which is totally cool. Like, you don't always have to gussy something up to sell to other people. But if you're intending for someone else to interact with the work, it's got to be revealed at some point. So, like, you might as well just sort of like portion it out into little bits and see how people interact with and react to different like portions. Like when you're talking to your friends, like if they find something really funny or interesting, because stuff like this can be very lonesome and you can kind of get sequestered away, kind of break yourself up and never come out. It's it's tempting and it's okay if you do that, but somebody's got to read it at some point, right?
Yeah.
So being by yourself, I don't recommend doing it by yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I think just you can see from just how this conversation is going, collaboration is one of the most helpful things you can ever do in a world, because also a world is full of people. It's full of
Yeah.
a lot of people. It's not one person. So, and it needs to feel like there are a lot of people who have built and brought a world to place. So if you can get different perspectives and imagine it from all of these different types, that is so incredibly helpful. It's a great point. I know something I like to do when I'm world building, like a hard and fast rule that I've kind of danced around and learned the hard way over time, is for every 2 new things you make in a world, make sure there's one that's familiar.
Mm.
Because if you're asking an audience to come with you and to explore this world, or you're asking an audience to play in the world, they absolutely do want to be delighted by new things, by strange things, but they also need to be able to connect to your world. So they need to recognize things in it. So if you're building a whole new planet and everybody speaks a different language and they're all plasma people and there's no gravity and all of this stuff, like that can be so overwhelming, and people don't have a way to connect, because at the end of the day it's humans engaging in the content. So you need something. So maybe they're all capitalists in this ooze world, right? That has this strange thing. Like, we get it. We get the struggles. We automatically identify with that problem. So that's our one thing. And then we can have ooze people, and then we can have no gravity, right? So it's about choosing what is the most important and what is new, and making sure that it's still relatable enough on a human level that people are going to feel and feel like they have a place in your story.
Gene Roddenberry actually did that in a very, very tangible way with all the Star Treks, even back to the original series, where he'd have the characters talking and they're having dialogue, and they'd start listing off philosophers like Plato and Socrates, and then they'd name this one that's like a Vulcan or a Klingon philosopher, and it's like you understand. It puts it into a content text.
One I know, one I don't, but you understand because you're in it. You get it. You feel like you're part of the conversation.
That is my partner's favorite science fiction trope. Whenever he sees it happening, he just sits there with this big smile on his face, like, what are they gonna make up? What are they gonna make up?
I actually did that in one of my books, Return to Masonry, which is my one that's not steampunk, where I had my characters cooking, and they're in a fantasy world with all sorts of weird and different foods, and I had them making Rice Krispie treats with marshmallow, and yeah, it was funny.
You just need those touchstones, I feel like, to really sell fantasy in particular, or sci-fi. Sci-fi even more so, because you really need a lot of touchstones so you can corrupt them, right? But
that kind of depends on what you're writing and how I mean, inherently writing a book is a largely solitary process. There may be different stages along the way where you're showing it to beta readers, you're showing it to your critique group, you're showing it to an editor, you might be showing it to a publisher, an agent at some point, but most of the writing, most of the revision, most of that experience is you and the story. Mm-hmm. And while you can imagine an ideal reader, you can imagine somebody reading it at some point, it's not that same sort of immediate sense of, we're setting up a game scenario, we're going to be working with a couple of different people, everybody's contributing to this. It's all you for a big stretch of it, unless you're collaborating on projects being a separate issue, co-writing. And with that, means that you do end up working in things that are familiar to you, but you don't necessarily think about it in terms of whether or not it's familiar to the audience. You might, depending on how you approach it, but I'm writing a series of novels that's a hyper-realistic series of books about a group of women turning into werewolves as they enter menopause. So it has lots and lots of touchstones, but I also write, fantasy and horror and so forth that are a bit more out there and that don't have quite that level of, wow, I can see myself in this character.
Mm.
You know, and I mean, I think that there definitely needs to be room for, you know, all of those things at once in a continuum, you know, to really experience, you know, different kinds of worlds and different kinds of approaches to them.
Yeah, that's. Go for it, Hannah.
Sorry, I think as soon as Celeste was talking about giving people something familiar along with each new thing, like 2 new things, 1 familiar thing, I immediately thought about the werewolves of menopause because everybody was having such good reactions to that in the chat. I was just looking at people having reactions to that.
Yeah, like that's.
That seemed like a good example. So I'm glad you brought it up because I was going to drag it out of you.
Say more about the menopausal werewolves. Ironically enough, the original idea actually came from one of those online medical sites. It might have been like WebMD or something. I don't remember.
That's awesome.
Just as a thing, I do wonder, and because something that I guess struggle with, or in game design it's unique, you don't have an author voice, right, to communicate directly with people, whereas when you're writing a fiction book, there's a clear voice that you can communicate in. And when I'm doing game design, there's really no, from me, the author, to you, the reader. It's all kind of removed. So I wonder if that voice and feeling that conversation kind of steps in and does some of the lifting of the familiarity that isn't present in game design.
Yeah, I definitely think that, you know, that's a really good point. You know, I mean, you've got things like you can manipulate that. Yeah. So there's things where you can do things with, for example, point of view and voice, which are not really under the scope of world building, but it's kind of part and parcel of the whole creation. But you can make things feel more immediate by shifting the voice. You know, that happens a lot with first person. You can do things in, you know, third person. Second person is extremely hard. It works okay for short fiction. It's very difficult to do for longer work. And what you're doing there is something that's analogous to what you're doing, I think, with gaming writing. When you're pulling people into the scenario, is you're pulling somebody into the head of that character. And, you know, it doesn't always work. You know, I see a lot of books where people decide to do multiple perspectives, but everybody is using the same voice, so they all sound one in. It's just not a very effective tool, but it can be. And especially if you're writing in something that's really visceral, like horror, for example, where you're wanting the reader to have certain kinds of emotional responses. You know, they may not be having exactly what you're hoping they'll have as a response, but you want a reaction, and you're aiming for a reaction, you know, in a way that you don't have if you're writing, you know, a nonfiction article, or you're writing, you know, something in a different genre. You know, romance, you want more of a feeling, you know, that feeling of connection, that feeling of connectedness to the characters, to make it, you know, more relatable for the most part.
So cool. It's so cool to think about.
Awesome. So I think the next one up might tie into a couple things that you all said as you were talking about that one a little bit, which is that, are there any unique considerations or challenges for creating or fleshing out worlds within your specific genre, medium, or format? So you've got a good head start on that one.
Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely, with game design, I feel like there's a huge thing in terms of world building, because there's only so much world building you can do, and then you have to stop because you have players that are going to be interacting with the world. They are going to be in there making random dice rolls, tearing things apart, kicking down doors, and they need to be able to tell their own stories when they came to the game, because you want a player to walk away from the game feeling like it was a personal experience. So unlike in a narrative arc where you have a character and the story unfolds, you as the author don't know how the story is going to unfold. So you have to just arm the players with everything they need to tell a story. So you have to give enough framework for them to feel like they're at home and they have the tools to make their own path, but you cannot tell them what the path is. And you have to leave a lot of options and a big space for them to make it their own. So that's huge, I think, in world building. You have to give room for the world to break and be reshaped in a way that the players want it to be, which is, so building a breakable world, I guess, is the challenge of game design, which is harder than you might think.
It's a great way to word that, though. That makes sense.
I think that's the biggest challenge I see when I'm talking to new folks about game design, or the frustrations of getting into it and having players run at it with a hatchet. You really have to celebrate. You have to celebrate when they destroy everything and the new ways you never thought they would. And yeah, put the fracture lines in there and just let them play.
So I would just say, I think that everyone here is primarily writing. If you're making a comic, unfortunately, there is a visual component. So one of the challenges is actually finding examples of, like, if you're doing historical fantasy, finding examples of commoner stuff is really tough because nobody preserved that kind of thing. So like a lot of buildings that people lived in aren't there anymore. They don't get preserved. They're not well loved like a cathedral or whatever. So you'll get like all this like super detailed, intense information about like buildings that everyone knows about and that have been there in the time period. And then everything else is just sort of like, well, who cared? Because, you know, and it's really hard to find visual references. So one thing that I found is that this is going to sound really silly, but the Assassin's Creed games actually have amazing historical 3D models of buildings. So if an Assassin's Creed game has been made in the time period that you are researching, you can actually go play the game. And I think sometimes they even have like a sightseeing mode for the games. So you can just go into the game and look at the buildings, and they do their research. And like, it's actually legitimately very good. So you can just like use that as reference, which is, you know, not something I wanted to learn after I found out that they had released a DLC with like, you know, early 13th century Paris. But, you know, like 3 years after I started researching. And another thing is, if you're doing it for another country that's not your own, a lot of the sources are going to be in different languages. So it can be hard to find translations.
Now I want to go play Assassin's Creed.
It's a beautiful game. I had no idea what I was doing.
I wouldn't either.
But it was so gorgeous. That makes so much sense now that you're talking about it.
Yeah, like there isn't really any models of this one building that nobody liked in Paris. It was just called like the Châtelet. I don't know how to pronounce it quite. But it was a prison, so everyone hated it. So when it was destroyed, nobody mourned it. Like, you know, they were gonna do it to Notre Dame, but then I guess a musical got written about it, and according to like Lindsay Ellis or whatever, gotta double check your sources sometimes. But yeah, so it's just it's one of those things where it's like, well, I found like a woodblock carving of what this building looked like in the 1800s after it had been added to by Victorians and rebuilt and all that stuff, but that's not like what the 12th century building would have looked like. It would have been, you know, probably just a big block. You know, they didn't really innovate round buildings until like a couple years after I'm writing this story. So yeah, and I think sometimes it's okay to just invent where you can't find stuff. That's all right. Like, you're not writing a textbook, so it's fine.
There are so many paths that diverge in a wood. The minute you talk about historical anything and the phrase, and then the Victorians touched it, it comes into play.
Yeah.
It's true.
I think, well, that could also be something fun in world building. You can invent an earlier time period and then, you know, later parts of the civilization patch up a building. That could be a fun setting.
Oh. I mean, anachronism, I think, is so fun. Obviously, a lot of the folks on this stream, for example, are femme folks or femme presenting, and it when we play with historical stuff and influences, boy, is it nice to not stick exactly to the way history was, because it hasn't exactly been pleasant. So that's something I love about fantasy, is getting to redefine how things work in a modern context, even if it's not the modern details. It's fun to be able to rewrite history and make it cooler and add magic. So that's a lot of fun with world building.
That is kind of the.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry. Oh, I was jumping in too soon. I was gonna go for ask Anna and Catherine if they had any feelings about what was unique towards the writing side of things.
Being that I write steampunk, the historical side is definitely very interesting. There's some wiggle room because, as Catherine said, when the Victorians touched it, everything kind of got jumbled. And but for me, one of the most unique or specific challenges for me with steampunk is if I want to give them a more modern type of weapon or gadget or home or conveyance, whatever it is, fashion even, I have to think about how would this be created with only the technology of the time period I'm working with. So even while I'm making it science fiction, I still have to kind of root it in the historical context. And I've actually had difficulty finding good resources on not so much the technology and the fashion of the Victorian era, but more the architecture and the layout of cities, as Hannah said, the interactions between more lower class people, those aren't as well documented. So that's definitely a specific consideration for me.
The neat thing about that era, though, is that there is a lot of primary documentation floating around.
That's true.
And so it's everything, from books like Thieves' Opera, which is about the thieves' quarters in London and so forth.
Yeah.
You've got things about there's a huge amount of research done about criminal classes, just for as an example. So there's a lot of fun things to play with in there. I do some stuff with Regency era settings, and just the level of documentation down to the kind of ribbons they would have worn under X situation is really kind of amazing.
That's true.
So lots to play with there. So I think from a fiction standpoint, I think the critical component of good storytelling when it comes to world building and how the two are connected is that you want the fictional world to be immersive but not intrusive.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't want something where there's like this incredible amount of detail that the reader needs to scan. And there are, of course, exceptions to that. There are, classic fantasy novels written back in the day. I mean, have you ever tried reading Lord of the Rings out loud?
It's
By the
very
time
difficult.
you get to and now we're going to translate this into 4 other languages. Why? Because I spent some time figuring this out. So you're going to find out about it.
Yes.
And depending on how you come at it, that can be a wonderful reading experience that you find completely immersive, but it can also bounce you out of it because you're like, do I need to know what this was in Elvish and Dwarvish and Old High Orc or whatever? So you've got, different takes on what makes for, an immersive world versus an intrusive world. Intrusive, I think you get, things where it's certainly possible to play with technology to introduce things that can be interpreted as, not fitting, but you have to justify it. So if you're going to set up a certain kind of world, you have dragons, you have peasants, you have magical swords, and then you introduce a steam engine. Okay, can you do it? If you can sell it, sure. I mean, that's something that, and by sell it, I mean just sell it to the reader. Is that your time travel narrative? Is that, your Mark Twain? Well, they had a time traveler and they figured out how to do this. How is that fitting in? And that mileage is going to vary for different readers too, as well. Which makes it really exciting to try to keep up with guessing whether or not people will relate to this thing that you're super excited about. And the answer is usually that some people will love it and some people will not. And so it's a matter of going out and finding the ones who are going to love that.
I've seen some B and even some A movies that ran into that same problem.
I just watched something the other day and they were filming at Versailles and suddenly they were wearing prom dresses and it was a rave. But anyway,
Oh my.
I think they ran out of money for costumes and makeup, actually.
Oh, so it was like, all right, what do you all got in your closets? We know you still have those proms.
Pretty much. Yeah. It's disappointing because I really liked the original book, but yeah, it was.
Yeah.
I loved your point about Catherine about the intrusive versus immersive.
Yeah, that's
it actually
so good.
It ties back to what Celeste was talking about for gaming, because that is that hard balance of writing games.
Yeah, it's like you can't ever, if you ever catch yourself monologuing at the players or the audience to explain something, you've done something bad and you need to re-step and think like, oh no, how can I explain this in a more approachable way, or not explain it at all. Maybe the character doesn't know what it is and they learn together, or maybe in the scene it's about that learning what this is rather than info dump.
Yeah, like I think that there's a way to there is a way to kind of iceberg the world building where you just show this one result of a whole bunch of complex stuff going on behind the scenes. And one thing that I think of is when I was learning about when people were gathering in the University of Paris for the first time, they came from all over the country, and like French as a language didn't really exist until like modern times. So everyone was speaking all these little languages from all these different kind of territories, I guess. They weren't really countries. So the language that they all decided to speak in common was Latin. And Latin is from an ancient Roman revival. And the reason that all these languages sprang from Latin is because once upon a time, there was this large empire. So this makes me think about all the times I've seen fantasies with a language called common that everyone just speaks with each other. So if you have a language like that, you can use that to imply the existence of either an existing empire or an empire that fell apart long ago and it's just being revived somehow. So that's like something that I was thinking about. So that's just something that learning about history will give you tips on how to do it. Like there's this problem that gets solved because of some of the aspects of your world. And it doesn't necessarily have to be like based in history, but like there could just be this really elegant, simple thing that implies a whole bunch of other stuff. So there is kind of that. You can have big, massive, complicated worlds, but you just got to choose which detail to show.
Pick your battles, I think, is a great way to explain world building, for sure.
I think that was a much more helpful way, Hannah, of explaining the show versus tell when you're writing.
Yes.
That was a very good point. I like that.
It's one of my favorite things that I've ever learned. I tell everyone this thing. I'm like, guess what? Let me tell you about Latin.
That's awesome. I am learning so much just by I'm like the fly on the wall here. It's great because I'm really excited about this because I'm gonna take notes. I'm gonna have to rewatch just so I can take notes. So we are getting close to an hour on time. So what I'm thinking we'll do is, obviously if anybody needs to jump immediately, then we can just kind of wrap this up right away and kind of end on that. But if you have a point you want to hit, then we can cover that, and then we'll just kind of cover the last question that from the list that I had sent you to contemplate before. So if anybody had anything they wanted to say before we jump to that question, go for it.
I think just real quick, I think something that a lot of people wanting to get into game design or people making the jump from game masters to game designers really struggle with, and I see this all the time. Don't get too hung up on world building before you have the core of your plot or your story. Like if you're writing an adventure, you should focus on the adventure first. Don't build this big world until you have to. Spiral out, right? Like start with the little town where the adventure is and build that town, and then build the region, and then build the country, and then the world. Like start small with your world building because little things and little details are actually going to be what people are interacting with. And I think it's probably the same in fiction where we start, with this young, unskilled peasant person who realizes they have magical powers, right? And then the world opens up. We see that trope a lot in fantasy for a really good reason. So start small. Don't make a whole world. Don't feel like you have to make a whole world just to write. Like start writing the adventure and start writing the immediacy and focus on that before you go big.
Yeah, exactly. And it's okay to have just a world that you build just for yourself and you add whatever you want and give yourself wish fulfillment. It's even okay to try to make it approachable to other people. The only thing is, if your end goal is to share it with other people, the world that actually exists in some fashion, whether it's writing or drawing, is better than the one that's in your head all the time. No matter how it turns out.
Awesome. Well, then I guess we'll roll right into the last one, which is the most exciting one, I think, which is what is your favorite work that you've created and or what are you working on now? You can cover both or either, so yeah.
I think we're all just excited about Catherine's werewolf, menopausal werewolves.
I'm immediately going to go and find where I can purchase.
Well, I am working on the third novel. I'm just saying.
Amazing.
And I have popped people's links into the chat as well. So, anybody who's listening or watching can click on those and to follow what everyone here is doing. But we'll cover that at the end too. But yeah, and anybody else like what you're working on or what you're excited about that you have worked on that you want to talk about?
I guess I'll go first because we're all so polite. Hey, once again, my name is Celeste Conowitch. I am a game designer primarily in the tabletop role-playing game space. If you want to see what I'm working on actively, I am a full-time senior game designer with Kobold Press, so keep your eye on them, specifically for upcoming Kickstarters, blog posts, other games, our Patreon series. My fingers are in a lot of pies over there, so you can check that out. Most recently with them, I co-wrote the Book of Eben Tides, which explores a certain section of Midgard, which is like the big fantasy world wherein a lot of their adventures are set. It's a world ruled by the Fae and like the shadow reality under reality that is just populated by magic and nightmares. And so that was a ton of fun. So check that out, definitely. The thing I'm most proud of, and I just recently finished working on, is the Venture Maidens campaign guide. So we actually made a campaign guide of the world of the podcast I have been GMing for 6 years or so. I've been writing this book for the past year. It is now officially out in community PDF form. We are taking submissions, feedback, and going to be releasing that final PDF for general sale in about a month. So if you want to see the brain and what a community builds right over 6 years of interaction and together and a guide to playing in a world, how to bring it to your own table, check that out, the Venture Maidens campaign guide. So follow Venture Maidens on Twitter and all the socials, or me at Conowitch. And yeah, I'd love if you checked it out. Thanks so much for being here, gang.
Thank you, Celeste. Now I feel I have to up my game. Okay.
Oh my God, you did menopausal werewolves. I am.
Well, in addition to the menopausal werewolves, I
money.
also run Queen of Swords Press. We just celebrated our 5th birthday. I'm about to put out our 15th title, which is set in a magical version of Minneapolis with the ghosts of the old streetcar line. Most of our titles have LGBTQ content. Many of them are by queer authors as well. So if you're looking to add more to your TBR pile, it being Pride Month and all, these are some things to check out. The first of my menopausal werewolf novels, Silver Moon, is going to be translated into German and released by a press in Germany this year, which I'm super excited about.
Congrats.
The second book's been out for a little over a year now, and I'm working on the 3rd book. And that's, and I'm also writing some short fiction. I just had a Sherlock Holmes story published, and I've got a weird Western coming out next month. So that'll be kind of fun. So yes, CatherineLundoff.net, QueenofSwordsPress.com. We're on Twitter, we're on TikTok, we're on Instagram, Facebook, all of the usual places. Very easy to find. Please join us, sign up for the newsletter, check out our authors. We're doing a big story bundle promotion this month. So all kinds of fun stuff.
I guess I'll go next. My brain just completely went blank. I'm Anna Kringle. I write steampunk and science fiction. Most proud of work that I did was probably Return to Masonry, which is neither of those things. That's my novel that I think I worked the hardest on and stretched my boundaries the most on. And so that one's the one I'm most proud of. One I'm most excited about was I'm releasing a serial story right now that's actually a solar punk. So it's kind of a space opera with all about a bard that has to save the world. So that's probably my favorite one right now. And I'm releasing that on my website, which I believe is in the chat. The links are there. Also on vocal.com. So
I just wanted to say thank you to everybody. I'm so happy to have met you. And thanks for such an awesome panel. So I'm the one who's saying, hey, the world that exists is better than the one in your head, and I have yet to put my money where my mouth is. So I'm just kind of a poser hanging out with you guys, but you can watch my progress on my blog called Comics with H, which I will link in the Twitter or the Twitch chat. So I bounce around from project to project, but every 2 weeks I update with progress or process and sketches and stuff like that. So if you want to watch something get made, I don't know what's gonna cross the finish line first, but just want to keep up with that. That's kind of my main project that kind of coalesces everything I'm working on. But thank you everyone again, and thank you to Christina for being our tech support and moderator.
Thank you so much, Christina.
Yeah, this has been great. Big shout out to all of you and GeekGirlCon for hosting us. And this was great. This was a really good time.
I'm so glad. It was such a pleasure
I'm feeling
to have you all.
so inspired right now. I'm like, oh, I have to go write. I'm like, oh, I should go to bed. No, I have to write. I don't.
Let's go do a thing.
Yeah, I really like I just am also taking away so much from this, honestly, because I'm also, I work on a lot of different creative stuff too in a couple different categories that I won't go into, but yeah, I'm definitely getting inspiration. So I really appreciate having had the opportunity to listen in on all of this and hear what you all have done. It's really awesome. I'm doing like 3 things at once, so I'm so sorry for like if I seem like a little bit distracted. But I am going to start a raid now. So we're going to go visit someone else who is creating worlds, maybe. Sincerely, Sunshine Cat is working on art right now. So we're going to go ahead and send over their way. In terms of what we've got going on GeekGirlCon, on Thursday, we're going to be playing a short hike. It's going to be me and Juliet. We're going to be it's going to be a very chill experience. And on Tuesday, I'm going to try and remember what I've even got that. Oh, it's the Share Our Stories stream. And content's a little bit unsure on that one right now because we might be reworking, but I mean, by Thursday, we'll have an update on that one. So, but yeah, thank you all so much for being here and talking with us, and yeah, and talking about how you create worlds. I'm gonna go ahead and start that raid going now, and then I'll switch us over to our thanks for watching screen in about 7 seconds. So yeah, everybody please, check out everybody's links in the chat there. Go visit their websites, go read their works, look at their art, play their games. Go give them the love and attention they deserve. So yeah, thank you all for being here. Off we go. We're on the raid.
Boy. Well, thank you so much, everybody. That was so much fun. I'm feeling
This was a
so
blast.
inspired right now.
Yay!